Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you get more information and listen to previous shows at our website, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, in my Zoom studio here in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country, and also the organizations they're involved in. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce two women, and they are Christi Hayes and Judith Loniak, both with a program called TIP, the Trauma Intervention Program of WNC. And folks, feel free to wave to all your friends and friends who are watching this. So if you're watching this, you're meeting then Judith Loniak and Christi Hayes. And she mentioned that I've met Judith before and had her as a guest on my show, but Christi Hayes grew up in North Carolina and went to college and law school here. After graduation, she moved to Miami for 30 years, returning to the Blue Ridge Mountains. She became a TIP volunteer in 2022 and program director a few months later, which is really good. We'll talk about that in a second, Christi, but a great way for somebody to get involved is just volunteer, and then you may get asked to do more than volunteer. Is that what happened to you?
Not careful.
Okay, yeah. It sounds it. I know Judith is a very talented professional photographer specializing in nature, landscapes, and fine arts. She's also a volunteer with TIP. She's also active in other parts of the community. Anything, Judith, I'm leaving out on your background?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm a chaplain at Centers for Spiritual Living, Asheville, and I do a lot of my work there as well.
I know last time we spoke, you were a volunteer with another organization. Are you still with that?
Oh, I'm Heart of Horse Sense. You
Okay.
interviewed me for Heart of Horse Sense before, yes.
Okay, yeah. I think, Judith, this is what, the 23rd time you've been a guest on my show, or 24th? Is it?
This is the 24th time.
Okay, not quite that many times, Christi. But let me ask you both this question. And Christi, your background is certainly interesting. You grew up as a young woman in Miami. Is that where you grew up, Christi?
I grew up in North Carolina, and then I moved to Miami. Okay,
so let's take it back to North Carolina. When you were a young woman growing up in North Carolina, did you always know you wanted to be in this, to be in a nonprofit sector and volunteer with, be involved in an organization such as this?
No.
Okay.
I thought I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay. And were you a lawyer?
I was.
Okay. And so are you still a lawyer?
In Florida.
Okay, in Florida, but not North Carolina. What got you then, so you were a lawyer, what kind of law did you specialize in?
Commercial litigation.
Okay. And so you did that for a bunch of period of time. How come you got out of doing it?
I really didn't enjoy the practice of law, at least in the context in which I was practicing it. And I came to realize that the things that I really did enjoy doing, the things that really made me happy, were volunteer things, that were doing things for other people and giving back to the community.
Yeah, I think your example is a great one for anybody listening or watching this show, in that initially you just started volunteering with the program, TIP, the Trauma Intervention Program. You came out as a volunteer?
Yes.
And then, so how did you transition from a volunteer to becoming involved more so in the program? What happened?
The program director, who was a recent hire, ended up leaving somewhat suddenly, and the role was open and I stepped into it.
Boy, so you were really at the right place at the right time?
Yeah.
Okay. And let me ask you, well, I'll ask Judith and then we'll come back to talk about what the program itself is. But Judith, the same thing too. I've known you through your work as a photographer, but also as you work as a volunteer. It seems you really enjoy doing this. You volunteer for a whole bunch of different places. What got you into doing that?
Well, I originally was looking for an internship for my chaplaincy education back a few years ago. And one of the ministers recommended TIP, but now I'm not a chaplain for TIP. You have to understand that. I'm a regular TIP volunteer. There's nothing about chaplaincy that goes into it. However, what happened was I applied for to do the training, and because of the pandemic, everything was shut down. And then finally I applied again and I got in. And
so-
the reason I got into it was I've always wanted to work with first responders and to support them. And so this was a way of giving back to first responders and giving to the people of the community that needed help during these particularly difficult times.
And talk about Judith, not Judith, Christi, if you would please. What exactly then is TIP? Because again, until Judith started telling me about it, I very frankly wasn't familiar with the organization. What is it?
The Trauma Intervention Program of Western North Carolina is TIP of Western North Carolina. We are one of 15 affiliates nationwide, but we're the only one in this geographic area. The TIP volunteers across the country at the different affiliates provide emotional and practical support to survivors at scenes of sudden trauma. So we work through the 911 system, and our volunteers are requested by emergency personnel, so a firefighter, EMS, law enforcement. They arrive on a scene where there's been a sudden tragedy, and they will call their communication center, who then pages us, and we send out whoever our volunteer is on call. We're available 24/7, and here we serve all of Henderson County and all of Buncombe County. And we provide emotional and practical support to the family members or the bystanders or friends or whoever has experienced that sudden trauma. Emotional support, and also try to help them from keep them from being injured again by what happens in the aftermath, and also practical support to help them with resources that they might need to deal with what's happened. So the majority of our cases are where someone has died unexpectedly, and we are called to a lot of automobile accidents, suicides, overdoses, unexpected senior passing.
Okay, so you get into some pretty heavy stuff in terms of helping people. Somebody comes to serve as a volunteer, such as Judith. I assume they don't just get thrown into the mix. You get training of some sort?
Yeah, we have a training program that is spread out over 10 days, nights and weekends, and it's 55 hours of training. And then there's 3 months of field training. So after people finish the in-classroom training, they will then go out on ride-alongs with law enforcement and do additional education and work with a mentor. And then every month we have a mandatory meeting that is a continuing education meeting, and that is continuing the training no matter how long you've been a TIP volunteer. Those meetings are required, and we come together and share calls and share experiences and support each other.
Ballpark, how many volunteers do you have in working with you?
Right now, I think I have 26.
Okay, so a pretty large group. And you were telling me up there, you're constantly recruiting other people or doing more trainings?
We do 2 to 3 trainings a year, and we're always looking for new volunteers.
And talk about the training. What does it entail?
Well, it's everything from how to work on emergency scenes to make sure that we're respecting the emergency responders who have allowed us to come onto their scene, to understanding what different reactions people might have following a sudden tragedy, that everyone responds differently. Information about being around the dying process or the death process or a body, information about the medical examiner system, why law enforcement might do what they do if something is a crime scene, just all the resources that are available in the community, and a lot of role playing, so that by the time a volunteer graduates from the training academy and goes out on a call, 100% of the time, people say, wow, that really kicked in. I'd done it so many times in training, all that role play, that I knew exactly what to say and what not to say.
And Judith, you being an example of somebody who actually went through the training not too long ago, you I guess have you completed your training program?
Oh God, yeah. You have to complete the training before you go out on your first call.
Okay, so now have you been out on some calls yet?
Yes, I have been out on maybe 6 calls, I'm not sure, but the main thing that I always take away from my training is what not to say, which is much more important than really saying anything, because sometimes just being on scene means just being there and being the presence of who you are and helping that person navigate. Maybe they they think they want to see the body, or maybe they think that they have to contact somebody else and what that looks like, or if there are their children on scene, are there, what do the police require in terms of their process? So we have to be able to support the police through their process while keeping the family safe and keeping the family informed. And the most important thing I've learned, I think, is sometimes you don't feel like you've done anything at all. And I've called Christi before for a debrief, and I've said, I don't feel like I did anything. But she said, well, what did you do? And then I tell her what I did. She goes, you did everything. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. And it's kind of hard to understand because it's kind of vague if you haven't been on a call. But the thing I've noticed is that sometimes if I don't really talk a lot, I just kind of navigate around and just kind of support somebody and see if they need a glass of water, or see if they need just to take a walk outside or something like that. Sometimes it's giving a child a stuffed toy. And the main thing is just being there for them and making sure you're not causing any secondary, what we call secondary injury.
Back to Christy's point, when you graduated from the training and you went out your first call, do you feel you were ready for that first call, or did you feel
Not
comfortable?
before my first call.
Okay, but
No way.
Once you got into it, did you feel comfortable?
Once I got on the scene, a lot of my other training kicked in as a nurse and stuff in terms of being with people. But the tip volunteer training itself totally prepares you for that. It's almost like a movie unfolding where, you just kind of know what to say next or what to do next. It's become inherent. It's become secondary to who you are. And sometimes I know just to keep my mouth shut and not say anything and just be on the periphery and move out of the way, check in with the police saying, is there anything you need me to tell the family? Or the family goes, what about this? Can I do this? And then I'll go to the police officer and say, the family member wants to know if they can, how long it'll be, or what's next. And then I bring that answer back. So it's working as a liaison between the police officer and EMS and fire and the survivors themselves. And that's the main thing.
Now the training.
So just to follow up on that, if I can, Blaine,
Please, yeah.
We really, when we're on a call, we're serving in two different ways. One, we're serving the survivor, the person who is having the worst experience of their life, probably the worst day of their life. Something horrible has just happened, and they are usually in total shock and don't know what to do next. People forget how to unlock their phone when they've experienced a sudden trauma like this. They'll sit and stare at their phone and say, I don't know how to do this. Something that simple. And so we are there to serve that person, to give them the emotional and the practical support they need to get through those first minutes and hours. But we're also there serving the emergency responders on the scene because they have a job to do. And they're not trained to give emotional support, and they don't have the time to give emotional support. And the last thing they want to do is leave a grieving widow, alone, whose family hasn't arrived yet, or a parent who has just found their child has taken their life by suicide. And law enforcement may come and decide, take all the information they need, determine it's not a crime scene, and they go on to the next call. Or the fire department comes and there's an injury and they go on to the next call. But we stay. The TIP volunteer stays with the family until it's a logical time to leave, usually until their normal support system kicks in. Maybe a neighbor or a pastor comes, or their family arrives, or something like that happens. But we're serving both. We're very popular with the first responders because they really respect how well trained our people are, how professional we are on scenes. And they like having us there because it helps them do their jobs better.
When you send out a TIP volunteer, do they go out by themselves, or is there a team?
Majority of the time, a TIP volunteer goes out alone, unless it's like a big event, something that's happened around a crowd of people, or where we would need, or if there were a whole lot of people on a scene. But majority of the time, it's just one person. Now, caveat with that is when Jude goes out on a call, If I'm her team leader, her dispatcher, I'm the person who has said, we have a call. Here's the address. Get in your car. We can talk more about how that works in a bit if you'd like, but the volunteer goes immediately on the call. And I provide the information about what we know has happened, what the address is, and the volunteer gets in the car and goes immediately. I stay in touch with the volunteer the whole time they're there. They check in and say, I've arrived. They'll check in every so often and let me know how things are going, what's going on, what they're faced with, questions they may have that I may need to research something for them. And so you've got a second person available by phone, your team leader, sort of your buddy, your partner. So you're never actually alone, even though you're physically the only one there. Then the volunteer lets their team leader know when they've left the call. And then we do a debriefing session after the call so that the volunteer can explain not only what happened on the call, but what happened to them and what they've been through. And so we provide the emotional support to the volunteer afterwards as well.
Judith mentioned something interesting in terms of what she learned a lot through the training. One of the things she learned are things you shouldn't say. And we won't have to go through the whole list, but I'm just curious, since she mentioned it, Christi, are certain things that volunteers shouldn't say?
Well, there's certain things that nobody should say when somebody's just experienced a tragedy.
For example?
And often in those situations, like I said, it's the worst day of their life and something absolutely horrible has happened. There are not many right things to say. There are a lot of wrong things to say that are just going to make that person's situation worse. And first and foremost, it's saying it's going to be okay.
Interesting.
Because it's not. It's not. And many of us, our impulse is to put our arm around someone and pat them on the back and say, don't cry, it will be all right. And in these circumstances where someone's experienced this kind of tragedy, it's false. And they're not going to believe you because it's not. Something is very, very wrong.
What should you say?
We have to untrain ourselves
right.
Not to say those things that we are all conditioned to say. It will be okay. You're going to be all right. He's in a better place now. Really?
So but help me on that, because it's an interesting point. What should you say then?
Well, as Jude referred to a few minutes ago, the main thing we do is we're just present. We are just a physical presence. We will sit with someone. Sometimes we get there and people are on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. We get down on the floor with them. Sometimes they are sitting stoically at a table or in a car and staring straight ahead and not saying a word. And we sit down to them and just sit quietly, and we're there with them. And we tell them that any reaction they're having to what's happened is normal, that this is an abnormal situation, but there are no shoulds in how they should be acting or what they should do. Often people are completely overwhelmed and thinking, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. We can let them know that none of that has to happen right now. Just breathe. We do things like sometimes it'll be an elderly person and this tragedy has happened in the morning and that person hasn't taken their medication. They haven't taken the dog outside. They haven't had anything to eat and they're going to have a long, long day. So TIP volunteers are trained to support people in that way too, like to help them think about the things they might not be focusing on that are important to their health and safety. So we say sometimes we're human bubble wrap. Someone is in a very fragile state and we just sort of wrap around them to try to keep them from being further harmed, either by their own actions or something that someone says or does, or maybe something that they see that it would have been better for them not to see. Because what often happens is that someone has a tragedy and a loss, and years later, what they're traumatized by and still trying to process through isn't the death of the loved one. It's something that happened that day or week around the event, something someone said or did or should have done or didn't do, or something they saw or smelled, or it's something adjacent to it, something that happens after it. And that's what Jude referred to earlier as a secondary trauma. So our volunteers are trained to know what sorts of things can constitute a secondary trauma.
Aside from Judith, when you're looking for a volunteer, what are you looking for? What makes the right volunteer for your organization?
Oh, I'd like to clone Jude and just have
exactly.
like 12 of her. That would be great.
That's what I'm saying.
That would be great.
But what are you seeking?
On the one hand, it takes a really special person to be a TIP volunteer. On the other hand, anybody can be a TIP volunteer. They sound like opposite statements, but they're not. We're really looking for somebody that has compassion and a willingness to help a stranger. Our volunteers, once they've completed their training, they commit to 3 12-hour shifts a month. And Jude can tell you some of those shifts, she sits all day long and we don't get a call, and she doesn't go anywhere. But she spent 12 hours that day being ready to jump in her car at a moment's notice. Other times you get a call, you jump in the car and you go. Jude lives in, is it Leicester, Jude?
It's Asheville Woodfin.
Okay.
Woodfin.
But when she's on call, she's got to go if a call comes in anywhere in Henderson County or Buncombe County. So that's a really big area. But she's agreed when she's on that call, when she's on call that day, that if a call comes in, she gets in her car immediately and goes to that address, no matter where it is. And our goal is to be there within 20 minutes. And that's not always possible given the spread. But 20 to 30 minutes is our goal. The police or firefighters ask for a tip volunteer, and before they know it, they're turning around and going, "I can't believe you're here already." But that's what we do. We show up immediately. We're not people that come in hours later. We're the people who are there right when someone actually needs that kind of human bubble wrap and protection. So it's people who are willing to do that. You've got to have a willingness to do that, to sort of put your life on hold for that 12 hours.
Well, I was going to ask you, some people sign up, go through the training, but then find out it's not necessarily a bad thing, but this isn't the volunteer opportunity for them, even though they signed up, went through training. Some people, I guess, come to the realization that maybe it shouldn't be a volunteer. Does that happen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. And that's kind of a good thing, I guess, if it does, so they don't get into it where they can't handle it.
Yeah.
So the volunteers, I mean, that's pretty impressive, the amount of time they put into this. Do you have so you're relatively new to the organization. How long has the organization been around?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are 15 TIP affiliates under an umbrella organization. The organization itself was started in San Diego, California in 1985. So it's been around for 35 years. Most of the affiliates developed offspring of that one. So we have older, well-established, larger affiliates, mainly in California and the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon, Las Vegas, Reno, different Orange County, just different places in California and in that part of the country. And then we have 3 on the East Coast, which is kind of weird, all little small towns. There's one in Maine and one in Massachusetts and one in Western North Carolina. But all of those were started by someone who was actively involved with another TIP affiliate, and they moved across the country and they said, they need TIP here. And so they started affiliates here. The Western North Carolina affiliate started operating in Buncombe County in 2015 because Mandy Atkinson is the national president of the organization, and she had been involved in San Diego for many, many years, and she moved to Mills River. So when she got here, she said, they need TIP. And so she started meeting with all the local officials and first responders and getting to know them. And it takes a while to get a program up and running. You've really got to explain it and prove yourself so that people are willing to say, send me a volunteer at the scene. A lot of police officers will tell you the last thing they want is another civilian coming onto a scene that doesn't belong there. Once they see what we do, once we convince them of it, so that's what she did, was she started an affiliate here in 2015, even though she's actually the national. I'm the local leader of this affiliate, but she is the president of the national organization.
It seems almost any community could use this organization. It would seem valuable to. I
think the concept and what we do, any community could use. I think it would be harder in some communities. So for example, I moved here from Miami. The problem with Miami is you can't get anywhere in 20 minutes.
Right.
The traffic is so bad that you just really can't. And it's a huge geographic area all spread out. And also some places like that, you've got language issues. So are you going to have a Spanish speaker on all the time and an English speaker all the time? That's a whole different kind of operation than what we have. So it works really well in this community, I think. So we've been working here since 2015, and then in Buncombe, then added the city of Hendersonville. And then last year, about the time I took over this position, we added all of Henderson County. So there are 47 agencies, and any emergency responder who works for any of those agencies, EMS, fire, or police, can request a TIP volunteer anytime.
Well, let me ask you this question. I'm then going to ask Judith the same question. But what made you actually, Christi, decide to volunteer?
I was looking for something meaningful and satisfying that I could do where I could make a difference. And I have experienced a lot of loss in my life. I've been with many people as they were reaching the end of their life or as they died. And during the pandemic, I took a course in and became a death doula or a death midwife. And some people have heard the term birth doula, but they don't know that you can also have an end of life doula or midwife. And just like a birth doula helps someone come into the world,
For sure.
a death doula helps them go out of the world. So that is some education that I pursued during the pandemic. And I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. I didn't want to do what I'd been doing. I had moved here to sort of start a new chapter in my life, and I didn't want to be a lawyer. And when I guess I saw something about TIP for the first time on Facebook, and I read it, and I thought, I can do that? The police would call me to come to someone's house and hold their hand and sit with them and help them get through that trauma. And I've been through trauma and been alone. And I realized the importance of when someone is in that situation, how important it could be just to have someone there with you, not asking you questions, not telling you what to do, not expecting anything of you, just sitting there with you while you process the shock that has occurred. So when I saw that, I said, I could do that? That's crazy. And where do I sign? So I signed up and I took the training. And I've probably been on, I don't know, 15 or 20 calls in the year and a half I've been doing this. And it is the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
And what's interesting, what you just said, is the fact that so much of this is, I guess, you have to resist your natural tendency, in terms of wanting to do something and wanting to help out. And I guess the real key, I'm hearing you say, you have to learn how to listen and just be there present, as opposed to doing for the person. And so, Judith, I'll ask you the same. Yeah.
Jude and I both are fixers. We're talkers. And we both have to hold back our impulse to fix people, our impulse to talk too much.
Yeah. Well, I can see, I mean, that I'm sort of like that, and Judith as well. So the same question to you, Judith. You've been so active in the community with, you work as a chaplain, you work with that other organization. What made you get involved with TIP?
I had been looking at chaplaincy and deciding what I wanted to do with it. And I wanted to work with veterans, and I wanted to work with hospice, and I wanted to work with first responders. And I got training in all of that. But I am fortunate. I actually was working as a nurse when I was injured on the job in 2009, and I haven't worked since. I'm fortunate I don't have to work, and I don't want to work. I'm too busy to work. And what I found was that anything I do, all I do is volunteer, because that's what satisfies me. Like Christi said, we do 3 shifts a month, 12 hours each. So it's a minimum of 36 hours a month. And I've done even more shifts than that when people couldn't take their shift or something gets sick. Everybody that's in the organization, all the volunteers come together. And if somebody can't work their shift, somebody will jump in. Or if somebody can't get to the person before an hour, somebody else will what we call jump the call. And they'll jump into the call until that person gets there, and then they'll decide who's going to stay. And so my whole thing was, I just wanted to volunteer, and where could I be of service the best? And I really wanted to work with the police and EMS and fire. And when I found TIP, when Sally told me about TIP, and I was like, I found out about this organization that I'd never heard of. We're like the biggest kept secret, which we shouldn't be. And I just jumped right in with all 4 feet, because it was exactly what I was looking for. Well, and I sit there on my shift days, and I'm anxious the whole time, because I'm like, ready to go, ready to go, ready to go, ready to go. But then when I get in the car, I turn on some Native American flute music, and I just center, and I go and I drive and I get there, and then I check in with the police, say what's going on, who do I need to be with, and the police are just so respectful, and they give you all the information you need, and they will do anything for us, and we will do anything for them.
You work, Judith reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. I may have shared it with you, but you and Christy certainly exemplify it. It's from a woman by the name of Shirley Chisholm. I don't know if you know the name, but she was the first African-American woman to ever run for president. An amazing woman.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, Chris, I don't know if you know the quote, but she said, service is the rent we pay for living on earth. You know, and certainly, I mean, to the credit of both of you folks, I mean, I can't believe, like I said, a lot of volunteer organizations, you volunteer and never get called. Here to have to put in just the shifts alone, it's a lot of time these people are putting into their credit. And talk a little bit about then two final things, Christy, if you would. Number one, if somebody's interested in the TIP program as a result of today's program, and they want to get more information or sign up for a future training, what do they do?
They can go on the internet and go to tipofwnc.org, and that is our website, which explains what we do and how you can get involved. You can sign up to be a volunteer there, or to get more information about volunteering. You could also, my email address is available there. My phone number is available there. Someone can certainly call my cell number if they want to. That number is 305-467-1747. And learn how to become a volunteer. One thing I wanted to mention, because we skipped over it earlier, just to make the volunteer obligation clear, it's a 55 hours of training, and then it's 3 months of field training. It's the commitment to attend that monthly meeting and to have 3 12-hour shifts. And you also have to undergo a background check. So our volunteers have been background checked. And we check the driving record and, make sure that someone, doesn't have a background that would disqualify them from being a volunteer. But just about anybody who's willing to make that commitment and go through the training and has that amount of compassion to jump out of bed in the middle of the night and go help a stranger.
The next training program starts when?
We haven't scheduled it, but it'll probably be around October. We do one in the spring and one in the fall generally. So I'm thinking October.
Okay. And one other thing I have to ask you about, just because I love the name of it, but you also have upcoming something called a fire truck pull. And what is a fire truck pull?
That's exactly what it sounds like. It's a fundraising event. There will be a fully loaded 33,000-pound fire truck in neutral, and a big rope. And teams of up to 12 people will, the tug of war concept, they will pull that fire truck 100 feet. And it's a contest of who can do it the fastest. And so the current champion from the last time we had this event is the Asheville Police Department, and they will be back to defend their championship trophy. This event is going to be on May 13th at Camping World Asheville, and it's our only fundraising event. It's an all-day event. It's the fire truck pull and a health and safety fair. So we'll have fire departments there doing education. There'll be an ambulance that kids can come climb around in, a bounce house and music and a food truck. And, it's a whole health and safety oriented event with this fire truck pull as its center. And it's a family friendly event. It's free. And we're hoping people will come out and join us and support the organization, learn more about what we do. And we'd be more than happy to put you on a team if you want to come pull a fire truck.
And if folks want to get information about that, same thing to the website, Christy?
Yeah, or they can go to tiptug.org. TIPTUG. TipTug is the name of the event.
Okay, tiptug.org. Well, thank you for sharing about that. I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World podcast. Judith, it's always a pleasure having you as guest on one of my shows. And
Thank you.
I'd like to mention also thank you to my producer, Cappy Tassetti. Hopefully I'll get to, well, I've met Judith, but sometime in the near future, Christy, hopefully I'll actually get to meet you in person. And thank you for all you do. Thank you for all you do for Western North Carolina. It's very impressive. Thanks again.
Thank you. It's nice meeting you.
Thanks.
Likewise.
Thanks, Blaine.